What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut podcast version of this week's episode. I've really been enjoying leaning into these longer versions of my weekly videos. I hope you're enjoying them too. If you're just joining me for the audio version of this recording, then you may not know that I'm recording from home today. I'm in my kind of big family room type space in the house, which I realize now that I'm sitting here is rather echoey. So hopefully that's not distracting. I decided to film from home because it's raining today, and in San Diego, we don't get that much rain. So our infrastructure really can't tolerate more than like half an inch of rain at a time. And if it rains more than that in a day, then there is genuinely flooding. It's an issue for a lot of folks, especially folks who are unhoused, living outside. I'm not going to trail off on that tangent today since that's not what this video is about. I'm safe and cozy in my house, but I just felt like I would record from here rather than go over to the office for this week's episode. All of that said, today I wanted to tackle the topic of how common it is for therapists to become isolated. Yes, therapists in private practice, but therapists in general, like not just people who are working for themselves in a solo business, but therapists who are working at agencies, who are surrounded by coworkers. I mean, no matter where you're working as a therapist, I think we are all quite prone to becoming isolated. I've definitely spoken about this topic already in prior videos, but in retrospect, I think I was staying on a kind of more surface level, kind of like problem-solving, solution-focused approach of like, here's how to make friends. Here's some places where you can find some therapists and try to befriend them. And though I think all those tools are useful and anyone would benefit from having those in their pocket, I think there's a much deeper, more systemic issue going on in our profession that's leading us to become so isolated. And so I wanted to speak to some of those deeper things that at least I observe in our field. And I hope that, other folks listening to this don't observe that in your immediate circles, but I certainly see it. And so I thought I would speak to it here and offer some thoughts about what sorts of systemic changes would be necessary in order to make our profession as a whole less isolating. So I think one of the most apparent reasons why therapists can become so isolated is because of therapist-client confidentiality. Confidentiality is so necessary for the safety of the therapeutic relationship, so please don't hear that as me questioning the need for confidentiality. But because we have to keep everything confidential about the work that we do with our clients, even information about who we're seeing, let alone what we're talking about in session, it can become isolating because we have so much private information just stored inside of us that no one else will ever hear from us. We'll never get to air it out anywhere. I mean, even in contexts like consult groups or supervision, where we're obviously encouraged to share information about the folks that we work with so that we can be best equipped to help them, we still need to hold confidentiality as a priority and try to figure out how much information we can share in those contexts so that we can glean wisdom from those folks and benefit our clients without disclosing who our clients are or oversharing, things about them to everybody else. So there's this inherent isolating nature that comes with having to protect so many people's private information, and often really, really heavy, difficult, traumatic, painful information. And piggybacking off of that a little bit, even in a context where there's freedom to disclose fully, let's say you're on a treatment team and several different therapists are supporting the care for one client, so you all know who you're talking about and all of their confidential information, there can be this air of kind of competition amongst professionals in the field. Of course, this isn't a universal thing that happens anywhere where you're consulting with other folks or collaborating on the care for the same clients, but I've definitely seen it happen. And when I name this competitive air, when I've seen it, it tends to be kind of subtle. So it's not like, I'm doing a better job at helping my client than you are. I know more stuff than you do. But it comes out in these more kind of subtle ways. Like, oh, you didn't know that for the differential diagnosis of such and such, you're supposed to do this? Oh, I thought everyone knew that. Or people saying things like, oh, any therapist who utilizes that strategy with this diagnosis isn't a competent therapist, or kind of making just sort of I know better than other therapists type statements without saying, I know better than other therapists. It kind of comes out in these subliminal, but still kind of stinging messages. I've seen this happen in all kinds of contexts, whether, it's a workplace where we're all providing care for the same caseload of clients, or a consult group, or trainings, where folks kind of make these sort of competitive statements. And when we see other therapists have this competitive air about them, it naturally pulls for us to feel like we need to bring our own kind of competitive air as well, because I guess we're supposed to know what we're doing, so let me show that I know what I'm doing. Or it can cause us to withdraw. Now, it's pretty apparent when we withdraw how that might be isolating if we're just feeling like, I don't know if I'm competent enough, so I'm going to just kind of hide in the shadows, and now you're in the shadows by yourself. That sounds quite isolating. But even on the flip side of that, if we kind of puff ourselves up and feel like I need to show how competent I am to the therapists that are around me, it can create an air of inauthenticity, because all of us make mistakes. Even if we didn't make a mistake today or in this particular instance, it could feel like I'm not allowed to make mistakes or reveal my mistakes, or if I ever messed up, I couldn't fully show it to these therapists that are around me. And that becomes very isolating, because whether we actually made a mistake or we fear that we might make a mistake, we are going to feel like we have to keep it a secret. And that is isolating as well. And another pretty obvious reason why therapists can be so isolated is because for so many of us, like myself, we have no coworkers. Like, I work for myself. If I wanted to, I could interact with 0 other therapists in my professional life. I definitely choose a different path than that one, but it's very possible to have a busy caseload and never interact with another therapist. So especially for those of us who don't have some built-in support system, like working in a workplace with coworkers, we have to be intentional if we want to connect with other therapists. Another variable that can make our profession feel quite isolating is that, at least for most of us in kind of traditional ways that therapists tend to spend their careers, we spend the majority of our workplace talking to people about their problems. I mean, even if the therapy we're providing is effective and our clients are improving, they might name their improvements, and then we spend the rest of the session talking about, the next step that they're going to work on, something that feels like a snag, a growth edge. And then eventually they hopefully do better and they leave. So we don't get to walk with them once they're doing awesome. Typically, we're in the thick of people's problems for most of our workday. Not only on the surface is it kind of a downer, you spend your day hearing about problems, but for most of us, I think, we are hearing about people's deep traumas, oftentimes things that they've never told anybody else, things that are really heavy, they're weighty grief. And if we're effective as a therapist, we are empathizing, we are sharing in that emotional process with them. And then without being intentional, or if there's not a built-in structure in whatever kind of context you're in, it's possible that that never gets counterbalanced with positivity, joy, laughter, humor, play, an overall sense of well-being, that there's generally good in the world or good happening in the lives of the people that I care about. And so if we're not intentional, or if we don't have it built into our existing structure, we can start to go into the spiral of like, the world is full of a lot of bad things, and there isn't a counter sense of hope or that there's good things happening. And that can become incredibly isolating, because most of us either burn out if we're weighed down by that perspective, or we start to wall up our emotions in order to protect ourselves. And that's not an intentional, malicious, cold-hearted thing. Therapists aren't pausing to say, I'm just so tired of all of this heavy emotional content, so I'm just gonna wall up my emotions to protect myself because I don't want to deal with it. Like, it starts to happen involuntarily, little by little over time, and it's a way our bodies try to protect ourselves from really, really difficult emotional content. And as therapists, we know when we wall ourselves off from some emotions, we wall ourselves off from all emotions. So if we're trying to cut off the heavy, weighty, grief-ridden emotions, we're also going to start to wall off joy and happiness and all the other emotions that we often like to feel. And it can make us start to become more and more disconnected from ourselves. And then as a byproduct of that, more and more disconnected from other people, not just our clients, but all people. and that becomes isolating. Now, all of this in and of itself is plenty to make a therapist feel quite isolated, but I think there is still more to the story than just this. I think overall, across our field as a whole, there are some cultural values that are quite isolating in nature. Now, I'm starting to realize that it's been a minute since I was in grad school. I graduated in 2012. So I am crossing my fingers and hoping that this is changing since I was in graduate school. But at least back when I was in graduate school, the message that I received both subliminally and explicitly is that we're supposed to get our stuff together, and then from that space we can help people. And personally, I think that's an incredibly harmful perspective to take. Now, at first glance, this sounds like a good value to have, because seemingly the opposite of that would be to just, not be self-aware at all, think that whatever my state is not going to impact my clients at all. I just need to deliver whatever tools to them and they can improve regardless of what I have going on in my own life. And we know that that's not true as well. So we need to take an approach of humility and knowing that we're just as human as our clients, and we need to value our own growth if we are expecting to encourage our clients to value their own growth. But it got skewed in the messaging, at least that I received, that somehow we need to have it all together and then check that box, and then we're now equipped to help people. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. I see this embodied in so many therapist interactions that I have, where therapists seem to be of the belief that they are already in a healthy state, as though it's static. They've accomplished it, they got their diploma in health, and now it's been decades and they're still fine and they know how to do things. And that's an incredibly dangerous place to be. Now, I don't blame the individual therapist for that, because at least that's what I was taught. And I assume they probably were taught something similar and they're just doing what they're supposed to do. But we know it's not a reality-based approach. I mean, that's like saying, you should spend 4 years getting in shape, eating healthy, and then you're good for the rest of your life. Like, you know how to be healthy and just go forth and be healthy. You don't need to worry about exercise or eating or, taking care of your overall well-being. Just, you're good. You already did it. And we know that's not how it works. And another point I'd like to make as far as kind of systemic issues within our profession, making it more isolating, is our stated value is vulnerability, meaning, own your growth edges, be humble, know that you always have opportunity to grow. There's going to be things that are challenging, things that you don't understand yet, things that trigger your own personal life items. And being vulnerable is a stated value of saying, I need help, or I don't know what I'm doing, or, this is really difficult for me because it reminds me of some other challenge that I've been through personally. We're encouraged to do those things on paper, but then in practice, vulnerability can often be mislabeled as being incapable. So if, let's say, I'm in a situation where I'm working with a new client and they're presenting with something that I haven't really worked with that much before, or maybe whatever they're coming in with is something that reminds me of something from my past that was really difficult for me, then we might say, oh, this is a good opportunity to be vulnerable. Go share with your consult group or share with a fellow therapist to invite their support and feedback. But in these moments, when we do this, often it can be perceived as not being capable. Oh, you're not equipped. You should know how to deal with that. You should have already figured that out. And I think that kind of piggybacks off the point that I just said, where we're supposed to kind of like have all our stuff together and then we can help people. And again, it's not how things work. Now, I can think of other things that are likely strong contributors to how isolating our profession can be. I mean, I haven't even touched on how incredibly overworked most therapists are to burnout levels, for poor pay. I mean, I've spoken about these things in other videos, and that can be incredibly isolating. How do you even find time if you're overworked to go seek support? I mean, that takes the resources of time, that takes resource of energy, and maybe you just need to go to sleep and self-soothe by binging some Netflix or something, because there's just no room left for all of that. So I think there are plenty of variables across the board contributing to why our profession can be so isolating, many of which I haven't even touched on today. What I do want to emphasize in this episode, though, is that if we want to decrease therapist isolation. And while we're at it, if we want to improve client care, if we want more therapists to enter the profession, because we know we don't have enough therapists right now, then we need some pretty radical change in our cultural values as a field. Being able to talk freely about feeling like we don't know what we're doing, or that something that's coming up with our clients is triggering our own personal history, or, maybe that we're on the brink of divorce with our spouse, or, God forbid that we're feeling incredibly isolated and we don't know what to do. Those should all be welcome conversations. Wherever you're at, whatever you're going through as a therapist, those need to be humanized. And we need to encourage those conversations in the same ways that we're taught to encourage our clients to have those kinds of conversations. So another way of phrasing it is culturally, we should hold ourselves as a profession to the same standards that we ask our clients to hold themselves to. Be human, acknowledge that you have needs. Ask for help when you need it. And if you're not so sure whether you actually need help or not, it's probably still a good idea to name it so that you can be seen. And it's probably going to be helpful if you name it in the right context. So if we can embrace those values as a profession, not just on paper, but like across the board, and I think it starts from the top down, employers embracing this with their employees, professors embracing this with their students, graduate school administrators embracing this with their faculty. I mean, you name it. Anywhere where there's folks who have power and leadership, if we can embrace a culture and value of I'm going to be humble, I'm going to acknowledge my humanity, I'm going to name when I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to ask for help, then that's going to trickle down into the culture of the entire profession. So in some ways, this video feels a little bit like a call to folks in any form of leadership to embody this with whomever it is that you interact with. But I think we can embody this in our consult groups. We can embody this in how we speak to each other, even if you are a student or, somewhere earlier on in your career and you don't have some identified leadership role. Every moment that we interact with another therapist is an opportunity to write a new cultural value into our system. And maybe, just maybe, am I being overly optimistic? Maybe. But if we can all embrace this, then maybe over time, our profession as a whole can be one where as therapists, we value ourselves as a human. We see our clients as equals. We see our leaders as equals. And we can feel safe enough to share freely about what's going on for us, whatever it is, however messy it might be, however confused or lost we might feel, and feel safe and supported and cared for, just like we try to do for our clients. And I think if we can shift our culture overall in that direction, the field would be a far less isolating field to be in. We could feel more comfortable and confident if we're reaching out to a fellow therapist or joining a consult group or speaking to a supervisor or an employer to trust that, hey, I'm in this profession that values being open and honest. And so I feel safe enough to be open and honest here. And that over time, I think, will chip away at how isolating our profession is, will make us better clinicians because we're going to care for each other and help each other get our needs met. And then we can then be better equipped to help our clients as well. And maybe it will be a more fun profession to be in. So maybe more people might be interested in being therapists as well. And before I end this video, there's one little tidbit that I'd like to add on here that might be a little bit of a hot take. I'm not trying to make it a hot take, but I think sometimes in contexts like consult group or supervision or other spaces where we're having a professional interaction with other therapists, when one therapist says to another therapist that something they're bringing up might be a good thing to bring up in their personal therapy, when they're seeing their own therapist, I think at least sometimes, whether we mean to do this or not, we can wind up communicating to that therapist that whatever they're bringing up right now, this isn't the context for them to talk about it, or this context can only do so much to support them through it. And that might be true. We need to have boundaries, right? So we can't just unpack all of our stuff all the time. But I also really wonder if we can find more ways to support each other well as therapists. Because when I think about times that I talk to my most trusted therapist colleagues about anything that feels like my own personal stuff interacting with therapy stuff, I always find it so helpful if they're willing to give me the space for it in a way that feels really meaningful and powerful, and also different than just bringing it up in personal therapy, because it's a space where we are mutually supporting each other. And that's something that is really hard to come by as a therapist, because we're either seeing our therapy clients where we're supporting them, but not vice versa, or we're seeing our own therapist where they're supporting us, but not vice versa. And if as colleagues, we can find ways amongst ourselves as therapists to mutually support each other in appropriate, healthy environments, then I think that's really going to help minimize how isolating our profession is. Hot take from Marie. Still see your own personal therapist just the way that you still see your own therapy clients and help them. But there's this kind of gap, I think, in the support network. Well, I hope you found this helpful, or at least supportive if you're feeling isolated. I see you. And hopefully we can make some changes culturally as a field to make this a less isolating profession. We can do this. I believe in us. We got this. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.